Cloud.
Welcome, everyone. We're so excited tonight to have Dr. Danika Maddocks here to talk about reducing power struggles with your 2E kids. This was one of the top topics that you guys selected in last year's parent survey. And actually, Callie, we could put in the survey for this year too. So in case you're not familiar with REAL, we are a nonprofit and we strive to ensure that Silicon Valley twice exceptional students thrive at school by raising parent and educator awareness of and understanding of practical research-based strategies to address their needs successfully. And if you're here, you probably know what twice exceptionality is, but we will just talk about how we see it. Twice exceptional students have both distinguishing strengths, high abilities or potential, and at the same time, complex challenges, such as autism, ADHD, dyslexia, anxiety, and others. And we think of them as being green because the strengths and complex challenges are there at the same time, which can make them a challenge at school in order to support both of these sides simultaneously. Reel has a lot of recordings of previous events, such as this one, blog posts, white papers, and a lot of information, all categorized for you by topic on our topic tool at real2e.org. So please visit our website and learn about school selection, anxiety, and many other interesting topics. We are wrapping up this school year's events. This is our last one for this year, but you can see the recordings on YouTube of all our previous events. We will continue to have our 2E bi-monthly parent support group, which you can also register for on our website. And shortly, we will be announcing our fall lineup. Reel is also part of this amazing new neurodiversity speaker series. And tomorrow evening, David Flink is going to be speaking about the power of mentorship. And there have been many other fascinating speakers and more to come in the fall. So you can visit neurodiversityspeakerseries.org to sign up for these talks. And if you'd like additional resources and support, we do have a private Google group for Reel members where people ask and answer each other's questions and ask about resources, which you can sign up for. And we also are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and our previous recordings are all on YouTube. Reel recently released a white paper that's available on our website, which is a model for schools with our 4 petals: developing connection, embracing flexibility, attending to strengths, and reframing behaviors. This white paper includes stories of real students in the classroom and how these petals help support them, as well as specific practical strategies. So we hope that you will download it and share it with educators in your life. We also have a free 46-page guide to twice exceptionality and IEPs for California, although most of it's applicable anywhere, which you can download on our website to get a lot of tips. I know May is IEP season for many people, so hopefully you'll find this helpful. And we are so lucky to have Danika Maddocks here today. I'll introduce her in a moment, but before we do that, I would love to ask you all, we're going to try something new that I haven't tried yet, so hopefully it works. We want to ask you what power struggles you are facing right now. So you can go to menti.com and type in this code to type in your responses. And you can also use this QR code if you have your phone handy. And they will appear on the screen live as you type them. So please go ahead. And let's see some of your power struggles. I'm going to try it on my phone too. If anyone's having struggles, just let us know. Oh, I'm seeing some.
Welcome to everyone who's just joining us. We are working on this Menti word cloud.
I'll give you guys another minute. I see homework is a big one. Bedtime, video games is big. Getting them in the bath. Yep. That's one in our house too. It's getting them in the bath and then getting them out of it. Thank you all for typing these in. I love watching this grow live. This is really cool. Getting them to eat nutritious food. Yes, also +1. Danica, feel free to chime in if you'd like.
Yeah, no, this is great. It's great to see these.
And if you'd like, would you like to start jumping in, or do you want me to try the school ones?
I think that's good. This is good. Why don't we jump in? This is really helpful. And it's good because I use bedtime as an example. Because the parents I work with, usually the morning routine and the bedtime routine are common sources of power struggles. So there'll be some examples in the talk. And then the principles would apply to kind of all of the things that I saw in there. So, but that was really helpful to see like what's on everyone's mind right now, I would say. So let me share my slides here and put these into presentation mode.
If you'd like, I can do your quick intro before you
Oh,
start.
sure. Yeah, go for it.
All right,
Go for
so
it.
Dr. Danika Maddocks is founder of the Gifted Learning Lab, where she helps parents feel more confident raising their intense, gifted, and twice exceptional kids. Danika has supported gifted and twice exceptional families for over 15 years as a teacher, researcher, therapist, and parent coach. Danika earned a PhD in school psychology from the University of Texas at Austin and an MA in developmental psychology from San Francisco State University. As a former gifted kid who's raising an intense gifted preschooler, Danika is on a mission to make parents' lives easier so gifted and twice exceptional families can thrive. So we very much appreciate that.
Thank you. Thanks for the intro. That's great. So as you all know, we're talking about reducing power struggles with your 2E kid. And here's kind of my plan for today, so you know what to expect. I'll do a brief, you already gave a brief introduction. I'll say just a little bit more about that. And then we'll jump into talking about like why power struggles are really common in families with twice exceptional kids, to kind of help you understand my framework and how I think about power struggles. And then I'll share 3 big ideas to reduce power struggles. And for each big idea, I'll have some practical examples that may be directly applicable to your home. You might be able to use them right away, or they might give you some ideas like a jumping off point. And then there'll be a few times where I have prompts to help you apply the ideas. So if you're here live, you know, if you want to follow along, if you want to have something to write on, to jot ideas down or type on, you can do that. And that might give you some questions for the end if you're not sure how to apply it. If you're following along in the recording, you know, you can use this just to kind of help you use the big ideas and try to apply them to your actual power struggles. And then at the end, we'll have time for questions and answers. So in terms of what to expect, I just like to give like a little bit of like a framework for how I think about a talk like this. Right. My goal is to really give you big ideas. And I like to start with big concepts because that way, like the big concept should really apply to almost any power struggle you have in your home and almost any 2E kid, where we're trying to get really big in terms of like these ideas generally help for most 2E kids and most power struggles. But then of course, right, when you want to know like, how do I actually apply those? So I like to give the examples of practical strategies. Like I said, you could either use them or think about how to adapt them, or they might just spark an idea for you. Based on my work with families, right? Like if you try these approaches, hopefully you would start to notice like small shifts in your interactions with your kids that could build over time and find a little bit more ease, right? Reduce some power struggles or prevent some, or be able to shift some in the moment so that they're shorter or resolve more quickly, or they don't escalate, that kind of thing. But I also like to just do a disclaimer, like this is not coaching, right? And really when I work with parents in coaching, like every kid and every situation is so complex, right? That it's like there's often a lot of adaptations and personalization we do to figure out like, okay, well, you know, you might originally think to approach it this way, but then this is what happens. So what do we do? So I just hope that you take what feels helpful and kind of leave what doesn't feel helpful or what you're not sure how to apply to your family. Yeah, so that's my goal for tonight. All right, so who I am, you heard the little introduction, right? So I've been working with gifted and 2E kids for a long time, and their families. And since becoming a parent, I've been particularly interested in supporting parents and working with parents. I grew up knowing that I was gifted, and that was an important part of my identity. And only in the last couple of years recognized that I'm also twice exceptional, and I'm raising an intense gifted 2E preschooler. He's 5. He'll be starting kindergarten in the fall. So I think I combine sort of all my background in like academic work, clinical work, research, assessment, all that with like the actual lived experience of what it's like to be a 2E person in the world and what it's like to raise a 2E person, and really trying to bring those different types of knowledge together. So I also just know from firsthand experience that it can be really frustrating and tiring and like, exhausting and confusing to raise an intense 2E kid. So and you can see this is me, and then this is me with my 2E kid is like a baby who's the type of baby who's like, I need to do push-ups and read books. It's like, great. Like, I'm sure some of you can relate. A very fun baby and a very fun 5-year-old. But let's start with just understanding power struggles and I want to give you some ideas about how to think about power struggles. Oh, and in terms of kind of structure for the evening too, so you're welcome to put questions in the chat, and the real team is going to be kind of compiling questions for later, so I won't be taking them in real time. I think we'll save questions till the end, but and I know that right then you'll kind of give me some summary questions to try to address as many of the topics that come up as possible. But you're welcome to drop questions in the chat or chat with each other if that's helpful. You can just commiserate or if anything connects. All right, so I want to start by just talking about why are power struggles so common in families with 2E kids? And I think they really are, right? I think this is like a really common thing I hear from parents is that feeling kind of stuck in negotiation and power struggles with their kids. And so I like to think about this in terms of like a broader context that we live in a society that's really set up for neurotypical people, right? For people, or kind of like this neurotypical standard or the way things like usually work or the way people usually work. And so just recognizing that the world and a lot of the typical expectations just about how things are supposed to go in daily life and home life and the community at school, those are not really tailored or set up for twice exceptional kids or teens or adults really, right? And I think it's helpful to have this framework because it can give us a little bit of compassion for the things that are hard for our kids, or if you identify as 2E, hard for yourself. One important thing to know about 2E folks, and maybe you've heard this before, is that for 2E people, like a lot of things that other people would think are hard, like math or problem solving or learning vocabulary or reading really quickly or things like that, come very easily, right, for gifted folks. And so it can look like, wait, this kid is so capable. Look, they can do all these really complicated, difficult things. And at the same time, for 2E kids, things that look easy and that people think like should be easy or seem really simple are actually quite difficult. And so that can be something that's really confounding and confusing about parenting a 2E kid, is that a lot of times they seem super capable, super bright, things come easily, but then you're like, why can't you brush your teeth? Or why can't you just do your homework, right? Why can't you just sit down and get it done? Or why are chores so difficult for you? And I think the reason a lot of the times is that a lot of daily tasks actually are difficult, right? Or are stressful for 2E kids, teens, and adults. And I want to explain a little bit about why. So if you see these characteristics on the right-hand side, not all 2E people have each of these characteristics, but these are common differences or common characteristics that can make daily tasks really tricky. And so while I talk through this, if you have some power struggles in mind, or if you're just thinking of your kid or kids, you might think about like, okay, which of these are relevant for my kid or which seem like they fit? So a lot of twice exceptional folks with all types of second exceptionalities, I would say, have differences in executive functioning. And really like their executive functioning, the way their brain works, tends to favor a deep focus on one thing, right? So like and there's some research that shows like neurodivergent folks like devote more brain resources, for example, to the one thing they're focusing on, right? And so it's really like you may see that your kid can really get into a flow state on something that interests them. This can lead to a tendency towards inertia, right? So that because the brain is really focused on one thing, it's not easy. It's actually like quite difficult to pull attention off of that and go to something else. So it's sort of like if your kid is doing Legos, it's really hard to stop doing Legos, right? They could do Legos for hours potentially. Or earlier, someone was saying, well, it's really hard to get them in the bath, right? And really hard to get them out of the bath. And that's because it requires overcoming inertia in both cases, right? It's not even necessarily that the bath is bad or good or whatever it is, but it's like, oh, but the switching from not bath to bath and then out again can be like quite difficult cognitively. Similarly, like, or kind of related a lot of times, folks who have ADHD or who are autistic, their attentional system is really based on interest. So it's easy for their brain to attend to things that are interesting to them or compelling or salient, right? Things that they like. And it's extremely difficult, right, to attend to things that are not interesting. And like I notice this for myself, where it's like I'm a very capable learner in a lot of places, especially the things I'm interested in, and I can remember a lot of things about child development. I cannot remember how my taxes work. I've done them many times. Like, I've been filing taxes for decades, right? And every year I'm like, oh my gosh, my brain is like a total like sieve in terms of that information. And it's so hard for me to sit down and do them, even though like they're not intellectually complex, but it's not interesting. And it's just like, ugh. So if you relate to that at all, just thinking for our kids, that's what brushing teeth feels like a lot of times, right? Or something that's not interesting. Um, for some twice exceptional kids, sensory processing can relate to why daily tasks are difficult. So a kid could be hypersensitive to some things, like really feel them more strongly than others. They could be hyposensitive to some things, like not notice them as easily. For example, like internal body cues, a lot of 2E kids are more hyposensitive to that. So they may not notice that they have to go to the bathroom or that they're hungry or that they're thirsty or that they're tired, right? That those signals may not be communicated as clearly to the brain. So it's less compelling to like come to mealtime or go to the bathroom, right? Stop and do that, especially if they're doing something interesting, or they may not feel sleepy at bedtime. Right. And then for kids who are hypersensitive, something like showering can feel painful, right? Or brushing teeth can be extremely uncomfortable or painful. So that these things can make daily tasks that seem like they, quote unquote, like should be easy, uncomfortable, or maybe just feel inaccessible or confusing, kind of like, why would I devote time to that? Like, I'm good. And then the last thing that can really contribute to a lot of power struggles and negotiation and pushback would be a strong need for autonomy, right? And a lot of folks who are neurodivergent, I would say this includes gifted kids who aren't twice exceptional. And then it's just enhanced for twice exceptional kids because a lot of autistic folks, ADHDers, right, like also have a really strong need for autonomy in order to feel safe and good in their body and to feel like they can participate in things. So for some kids, even just like the pressure or the demand or the expectation that they do something can cause a lot of stress and an instinctual resistance that might look like fighting with you, right? Arguing, debating, trying to get out of it, trying to negotiate. Often like, and I think the traditional view of this is kind of like that kid's being a pill, or they just don't want to cooperate, or they're trying to make things difficult. But usually it's like a coping strategy where they're like, that doesn't feel safe. It may not even be conscious. They're just kind of like, no, or there's like some stress response. And they're using a lot of negotiation or figuring, trying to finagle something as a way to regain autonomy and feel safe. So all these things, as you hear me describe them, hopefully it makes sense why these would lead to power struggles or why they would be common. So this is just a slide too that just gives an example of like what this actually looks like or what it can look like in real life. One second, just moving my little thing around here so I can see the screen better. Okay. So for the morning and bedtime routine, for example, right, if you think about it, a lot of people would say like, that's pretty easy. It's the same every day. Like it's not that hard, the different tasks. But if you think about those twice exceptional characteristics, each of these routines usually has multiple tasks and transitions. So that requires executive functioning to like initiate the task, remember all the tasks, follow through on the tasks, transition from one task to the other. Most of the tasks are pretty boring, which would make it hard to focus on or hard to feel motivated. Right? Most kids don't think that like getting dressed or brushing your teeth or eating breakfast are very interesting. There's a lot of demands and requests. So it's a lot of things like you have to do this. If you're reminding your kid a lot, asking them to do things, telling them to do things, that can, that limits their autonomy. So they're feeling some pressure. There's time pressure often, like we need to get this done and get to school, or it's bedtime, and that can feel controlling to kids who are sensitive to that and who need autonomy. Some tasks are not sensory friendly for kids who are sensitive, right? So that it may feel uncomfortable or painful, or like I said, for kids who don't have strong internal signals, it may be like they may not feel an internal need to do those tasks. And then some just additional things like sleep is hard for many twice exceptional kids. A lot of ADHDers and autistic folks, their bodies don't produce melatonin as much as the average person, so it can be hard to fall asleep. And then a lot of times transitions can be emotional. Like a lot of gifted kids don't want the day to end. They have lots of things they still want to do, right? They don't want to like give up for the day. They have plans and ideas and they want to keep reading and playing. Or they may want to be close to their parents. And then for some kids who don't like going to school or for whom school is stressful, the whole morning routine can be kind of colored by that too. So like some of this stuff is kind of tough. So as we talk about strategies today, I wanted to share, I know this is like a really text-heavy slide, but I wanted to share this big framework for how I think about really supporting gifted and 2E kids and their families in general, and that I think this can be really helpful for thinking about power struggles. And so this is thinking about kind of the underlying paradigm and assumptions we make about neurodivergence, right? And all gifted and all 2E kids are neurodivergent. The way their brain operates is different than the norm, right? And so most of our culture really operates under the pathology paradigm, right? Which just suggests, and these are kind of like often unspoken assumptions, although sometimes they're directly spoken, right? But the pathology paradigm assumes that there's like one right or normal healthy way for human brains to work and human minds to work and to function, right? Or that there's at least like a narrow range that's considered like appropriate, healthy, normal, good. And then therefore, like if your neurological configuration, right, like if your kid's way of thinking and behaving diverges from that, then there's kind of something wrong with them, or that's inappropriate, it's bad, it's unhealthy, there's just something off about it. And a lot of neurodivergence is framed in this way. Whereas the neurodiversity paradigm, right, kind of reworks that and points out that like diversity in human minds and brains is just a fact, like the same way like biodiversity is a fact. Like it's this natural and healthy, valuable form of human diversity, right? And that really arguing like then that means there is no normal or right style of human mind, the same way there's no normal or right style like ethnicity, gender, culture, sexual orientation, right? All like, and those are all kind of parts of identity that in the past, right, have been really pathologized. But then there's been work to say like, hey, we don't need to pathologize other races, other genders. And so similarly, right, this idea that there are social dynamics that kind of like develop around neurodiversity, and that these include things like inequality, privilege, and oppression. But that at the same time, if you can embrace neurodiversity, it's a source of great creative potential in a society. So this is a lot of information and a lot of wording, and you can see this is these are direct quotes taken from this essay by Nick Walker, who is like an autistic writer. I recommend her essay if you want to learn more about this. But the reason I like to point it out here is because I think one of the hardest parts of parenting a twice exceptional kid, there's like logistically hard things for sure, and power struggles are exhausting. But even within a power struggle, often the hardest part is that like as parents, we've been raised in the pathology paradigm, and we have been like raised and trained, and we're surrounded by a culture that tells us like, if our kids aren't doing these things, there's something wrong with them, or if they're struggling with this stuff, or if they want to do it a different way, there's something kind of wrong with that. That's not normal and healthy. And so I want you to feel empowered to say like, actually, there is no normal right one way to do this. We can figure out ways that work for us, right? And to know that even if your kid is privileged in lots of ways, or lots of their identities are privileged, being autistic or having ADHD or being dyslexic, those are not privileged neurotypes in our society, and that those people do experience, they may be experiencing oppression, bullying, discrimination, misunderstanding, so that like when you're kind of advocating for a different way at home, even just in your own mind, or advocating at school or something, I think a lot of parents worry like, oh, I don't want to push too much or be too different, or be like a difficult parent. But I really see it as like being an advocate for your kid who otherwise would often be misunderstood. Um, so this is a big picture I like to share. If y'all have questions about this, I encourage you, you're welcome to ask them, and I can talk about them at the end. But this, I think, paradigm underlies my approach. It's a helpful framework. So let's talk about like, what does that actually mean in terms of like power struggles and when my kid won't brush their teeth? So, okay. So we're going to do 3 big ideas, right? So the first big idea is, given all that information, and if you think about how that information relates to your kid and whatever you're having a struggle about, can you make the task easier, right? So why would we make tasks easier? Like I said before, right? For a lot of 2E folks, hard tasks are easy and easy tasks are actually hard. And because of this, I think it's really easy to underestimate how difficult a task can be for our twice exceptional kids or teens or even adults, because they don't seem like they should be difficult. But kind of if you're having a power struggle about something, it suggests to me like something about it is difficult, right? So thinking, can we make it easier? Because if you can make it easier and reduce stress around that task, you're likely to reduce the stress and conflict that you have with your kid. And in the long run, even if you're accommodating them a lot by making it easier now, you can actually build their capacity because they start to feel competent and doable. They feel like you're a team. They feel like they can accomplish this in some way, and they're not stressed out all the time. And that helps them build capacity over time. The other reason it can be helpful just in the long run to make tasks easier is I think that it's really a way of helping your kid understand and appreciate their brain. Like if brushing teeth is hard for them, acknowledging that and being like, yeah, and there's nothing wrong with you that brushing teeth is hard. We just have to figure out how to accommodate it to make it easier for you now. And then they can use that throughout their life. Like a lot of autistic adults struggle with brushing their teeth, right? And find oral hygiene really stressful. And most of them didn't get help figuring it out when they were kids. So sometimes by making tasks easier, we're actually like teaching our kids self-advocacy and appropriate accommodation too. So how can you make tasks easier? So I'll say like, this is the big idea, right? Try to make the task easier. And that could apply for almost any task or any kid. And then in terms of how can you actually do it? One way to think about it is to be really thoughtful about your kid's capacity. I guess this is both a big idea and a thing you could actually like implement too. But for this one, like I said, it's really easy to like have expectations that would exceed our kids' capacity for some of these things that we're having power struggles about. So being kind of open to this idea of neurodiversity, that there's no one right way to do something, and to know that your kid's capacity is really individual, right? So kind of how much your kid can handle something is really just individual to them, but then it also fluctuates over time. So there may be some days or some times of the year when your kid has a lower capacity. I would actually say right now is a time when a lot of 2E kids are like running out of juice, especially if they're enrolled in school. They're just exhausted by this time of year. A lot of the parents I work with say this is a hard time of year. Their kid is having a lot more trouble than usual. So you may know like they may need the tasks to be even easier right now because they just don't have as much capacity. So with this, I would just encourage you, instead of thinking about like the idea of an age appropriate expectation, just think about what's truly doable for your kid in that moment, in terms of like, what could they manage without becoming overwhelmed? So if you're having a power struggle about it, it may be a little bit beyond their capacity. There may be an aspect of it that feels too hard. And when you think about this, you could think about the actual demands of the task itself, like what does it require? And are some of those hard for them? But you could also think about like the time of day or who else is involved or what they were doing earlier in the day, right? Like if there's a particular reason they might be kind of out of capacity. Um, and then if you can, some demands or things that you're fighting about, you could just eliminate, like you could just drop them, or you might be able to adapt them to better fit their capacity. So here's just a visual example with like brushing teeth, which I know is on the little word cloud at the beginning and is a common struggle area. So if you're wondering like, why do we fight about this all the time? Why does my kid resist it? This is just a list of like some of the parts of it that could be hard for a kid. You could have a kid where all of these would apply, or there are some kids where just one piece applies, but it could still feel overwhelming. Um, and then when you think about capacity, right, if you look at this is just the idea of like if you start out at 100% in the morning, right, and then they brush their teeth, they've still got a bunch of capacity left, right, but it kind of took up some of their energy to concentrate and to do that and to get through if it's uncomfortable. But then at bedtime, like they've used up a lot of their capacity throughout the day. They're not as resilient, right? They don't have as much energy left. And so you may have a kid who really can't brush their teeth at bedtime or who throws a fit about it or gets overwhelmed or resists, even if the morning is easier, just because capacity is always changing. Another way to make tasks easier is to incorporate something that's interesting or fun, right? A lot of power struggles are related to tasks that aren't inherently interesting or fun or motivating. And if you think about our kids like attention-based, like or interest-based attentional systems, like if you can make it more interesting or more fun, it's going to be so much easier for their brain to focus on that thing. So there's lots of ways to do this. You can be creative. Some examples that families I've worked with have found helpful is like using media that the kid likes during routines or tricky tasks. Right. So maybe like if it's hard to get out of bed in the morning, a kid could listen to an audiobook while they get up and get things ready. Or I've had other parents come in when their kid had a really hard time getting up and getting to school. They would just come in and ask them about the books they were reading or ask them about the topics they're really into. And then the kid is like happily talking with the parent while also doing the routines. And for some kids, just having that body double, like another person there, can just make it a lot easier to. It's like you can incorporate fun things into bath time, meal time, even homework in some cases, right? So it could be something as simple as like, here's a nice snack for you to start out your homework, or you can listen to music while you work on your homework, which works for some homework and not for others. I've had like a family where the kid had math homework that was just like not that cognitively challenging, but it was like a bunch of practice problems and she had ADHD. And if she could watch TV while she did it, it was so much easier for her. She didn't really make errors. She got it done so much faster. There were no more power struggles. Right. And that's a great example of something that like traditional parenting would be like, you can't watch TV while you do your homework, and that's not going to work. But they tried it and it did work. And so it's like, well, you can do this. This works with your brain. This is actually helpful. There's no one right way to do this. Sometimes you can just be playful. You could race your kid who can do it fastest. Just make sure they always win if you want to avoid overwhelm. Right. If there's ways you like to play together with like being silly or doing accents or jokes or whatever would make it more fun. You can also finish with something they love, like a lot of kids who don't love bedtime, but if they know I get to read the D&D manual out loud to my mom when I'm done. That's great. Or I get to watch one final video before bed or something like that. That can help. So I was thinking with bath time. Bath time used to be really tricky in my house. My kid hated getting into the bath, but also hated getting out. And we used like a popsicle bath, which I had learned from Busy Toddler. She does like toddler ideas, and she framed her popsicle bath as like, it's just a fun activity for a boring day. The bath is not a fun activity in my house. But for a couple years or like a year and a half, my kid had a popsicle with every single bath. And now he's just like, bath time, this is great. Let's go do it now. So it's like sometimes you just accommodate your kid for a while and then they stop resisting, or that, they find a way to make it work for them. And sometimes they need the accommodation their whole life. That's fine. But yeah. Another way to make tasks easier would be to offer support for what's hard. And so for your kid, if you have a sense of like what part of the task is hard, or if there's a specific aspect of it, you could just offer support around that. So I'm not going to talk through all of these, but I'll highlight a few. Well, and I guess I'll say this could be something as simple as like hands-on help. That is huge for a lot of families I work with, where it's like instead of like giving lots of reminders, having the kid, expecting the kid to do things independently. It's like, let me just help you get your PJs on, or like, here, I got your toothbrush ready, right? Kind of helping with certain things. And that's something you could just do right away tomorrow morning at home. So it could be something like that in terms of tailored support for what's hard, all the way to like, you'll see here, you could seek occupational therapy. Like if your kid has a lot of sensory processing differences or sensory needs, you might like some expert input on like how to meet their sensory needs during the day, or how to make some of these tasks feel more comfortable for them, right? I put on here sleep challenges. Like if your kid really struggles to fall asleep and that contributes to a lot of power struggles, you could inquire about melatonin or supplements, or does your kid need a sleep study? Because 2E kids are prone to, like I said, make less melatonin in their body. They're prone to sleep apnea and all kinds of medical things that can interfere with sleep. Some of them really benefit from having like an adult fall asleep with them or sleep in the same bed. Right. And that would be a great example too of like that maybe works for your family in a way, even though other people may not do that at that age. A lot of families with twice exceptional kids do co-sleep, or the parent falls asleep in the kid's bed or helps the kid fall asleep, because it can be so hard for these kids to settle sometimes. So these are just some examples of how to make things easier. Okay, so if you want to apply this to your situation, you could think of some of your common power struggles and just think about like, how could you make the tasks easier? And these are just questions about the different strategies that I went over, right? So you could take a minute to jot down some ideas. Could you incorporate an interest or something fun, right? Just being thoughtful, like, do the demands in this task, is it more than my kid can really manage without getting upset or overwhelmed? And then I added in here too, like, do the demands exceed your own capacity? Because for some of us, or for certain tasks, you may just be like, look, I just can't, like at bedtime, I'm exhausted. I can't manage this without becoming overwhelmed. So maybe you reduce demands on yourself too and make the task easier for yourself, right? Or say like, we're just not going to do some of these things at night. We'll save them for the morning, right? Can you adapt or eliminate it? Given their needs and challenges, what supports might be most helpful? So just some reflection questions for you. All right, so the next big idea is to enhance autonomy. And so this is really addressing that need for autonomy that a lot of 2E kids have, and that like the more autonomy they have, the safer they can feel. Right, so why enhance autonomy, or why focus on that? So I think twice exceptional people and a lot of autistic folks and ADHDers and gifted folks, like if you look at kind of adults talking about their experience, like it's just really common to like need a feeling of autonomy to feel safe, to engage with something, to feel regulated and calm. And that's hard because kids don't traditionally get a lot of autonomy in our society, right? That's just not how it's set up. But for kids, for a lot of 2E kids, if they feel a loss of autonomy, either because they've been told or asked to do something, right? Or they've been asked a question and there's a response expected, that can lead to a stress response, right? So it could look like fighting, like some kids will be like, like, no, or like, you can't make me, or I don't want to do that. Some kids will just avoid and run away, kind of a flight response. Some will freeze, not answer, or they may be like, my legs don't work, I can't move. Some kids will fawn. If your kid is a fawner, if they were fawning at home, fawning is like people pleasing when stressed. A lot of kids fawn at school, and then so they look like incredibly well behaved at school, but then they come home and they're really upset. If your kid fawned a lot at home, you probably wouldn't be here wondering about power struggles, but it could happen. But But right, so this can lead to power struggles for sure if a kid isn't feeling enough autonomy, because really like a power struggle is often them trying to regain autonomy and to let you know in some way, like, this isn't working for me, I need it differently, right? Um, Also just in general, like I talk about autonomy in my coaching program and we devote time to it because like research on human motivation, just of any person shows like, right, having autonomy increases motivation, right? Like autonomy supports intrinsic motivation. So sometimes like your kid may not be super intrinsically motivated to brush their teeth, but sometimes giving them more autonomy around it does let them feel a sense of ownership where they can approach it and figure it out in a way that works better for them. So some ways, like just some practical ways that you can enhance autonomy. One way to think about it, hold on one second, is just embracing flexibility. So you could try to identify your most important goal in the moment around whatever the power struggle is, and then think like, what else could be flexible? So if your goal is to help your kid clean their teeth or like take care of their teeth kind of as best as possible, what else could be flexible? Like all kinds of things. So you could do it in different locations, right? You could do it in different body positions. Could they do a different activity while brushing their teeth or while help them brush their teeth? Who's involved? Like usually we might expect older kids to brush alone, but I've worked with tons of parents, especially if their kids are in burnout or um, like exhausted, right? Where even with teens, they either help or they start like they bring the supplies over to the teen, right? So just being flexible about how that looks. Or if a kid is like, bring it to me, you're like, okay, I'll do that instead of being like, no, you need to do it yourself. You might get flexible about doing it early or later, different time. There's all these different ways to get flexible. Um, and sometimes just being flexible about I guess the standards too. So being like, okay, there is like an ideal way to brush teeth, but if your kid is fighting brushing teeth at all, if they can brush for 30 seconds instead of 0, right? Or 30 seconds without fighting or like having a meltdown, that's better than 0, right? Even though it's not 2 minutes or whatever. But in kind of embracing that as like good, like for your kid and for your family right now. Um, the other thing you could be flexible about that I was thinking of recently is just like their mood or attitude, where it's like maybe they brush teeth in a big old huff and it's just like, that's fine. Like, like you got your teeth cleaned, like, and yeah, you don't like it, you're pissed, that's fine. But like, way to clean your teeth, right? So sometimes just like being flexible about those other things as a parent and being clear about what's really important. Now, some people who submitted questions ahead of time, I know were curious about teens or young adults or kind of college age, right, or adult age kids. So I wanted to put in an example of like an older teen or young adult where like maybe you really want your kid or you're hoping that they're going to be able to earn some money, right, get some more independence financially. But again, you could just be like, what else could be flexible to make this more doable for them? So some of it for like the who I had put like, you could offer to help them or draft a resume or help look for jobs or whatever. Or could they work with someone that you already know? Maybe your friend would hire them, right? Getting flexible about that. But I guess the other way would work too. Like, so a lot of times I think it can be hard to give our kids autonomy and to stop pressuring them and to just let them figure it out on their own. So you could also embrace flexibility by like leaving it alone for a while, right? Or give more autonomy by like, I'm not going to ask about it for a while. Or you could just let them know, like, I'm available, if you want help, but not reminding or prodding or things like that. But just that there's other ways to be flexible too. Like maybe most teens in your area work it, like in food service or at a grocery store, but your teen doesn't want to do that, or that would be totally stressful or overwhelming. So maybe there's something else that would be a better fit for them. Could they code online and do some coding work, right? Could they babysit? Could they tutor in a subject that they're really passionate about? Just getting like creative about how you could meet this goal. Okay. So for this big idea, if you want to take a minute to just think about your power struggles, is there a way you could enhance your kids' autonomy around it, right? So if you think about like, what's the most important goal? What could be flexible? And I would say too, this would be a good place when you're thinking about the goal to also just consider the neurodiversity paradigm. Because I think a lot of times as parents, we feel a lot of pressure that our kids should be doing things to the same standard or in the same way as other kids, not only the process, but like the end product, right? Or the end goal. So you could also think, would you be flexible about the goal, I guess? Right. So common things would be that people might change in a family with twice exceptional kids would be like, well, um, the goal might start as like, I want us to have a nice family dinner, right? And then it may be like, ooh, that is not accessible. Like if we really think about how hard it is for the kid to access eating or to sit still at a table, or for us to all feel safe eating the same foods, or whatever it is, or like everyone's too tired and cranky at the end of the day to talk and sit. You may change your goal and be like, okay, the most important goal is actually for everyone to get fed when it comes to dinner. And then maybe we're going to do our family bonding time in a totally different way. We're going to play games together, or we're going to go on a hike, or whatever it is that works better for your family. And to say like, we can let go of that idea that like we need to have like family bonding time over dinner, which is one I hear about a lot, because I think there is pressure in our society that like that's important for families and it's good. But for a lot of families with neurodivergent kids, it's actually a huge source of stress and is not contributing to well-being. So that would be a place too where you could consider like, is this goal at all based on the idea of like, this is the right way to do it, or this is how it should go? And do you want to push back on that at all? Or be like, for us, this is going to be a better fit. Um, when you're thinking about autonomy, you can also think about like, what's your kid asking for? What are they negotiating about? Because sometimes like you can see negotiating as like you can turn negotiation into collaboration potentially. So maybe you could give them some of the things they're asking for or negotiating about, or they're giving you some clues about what would help them like approach this task better. And that there may be some of those things that you could say yes to, or that you could meet halfway, for example. All right, so the third big idea is waiting to teach. And I usually talk about this idea as part of like a 3-step framework for responding to just any intense feelings, big feelings, intense perspectives. I call it the view framework. I'll just say like the first step is validating the intensity, the intense feelings or perspective, encouraging your kids' strengths, and then waiting to teach. For today, since we're talking specifically about power struggles, I just wanted to start with wait to teach, because I think this would be the most important part of the framework when you're already kind of like in a power struggle. So I'll explain it and I'll talk a little bit about validation too. All right, so the idea with this, and this comes from like my work with lots of families, I kind of developed this framework out of hearing what was hard for a lot of families and how a lot of interactions went. Um, so the idea with this is just like during a power struggle, or when you feel like you're approaching a power struggle, or really anytime your kid is having a negative feeling, right, or resisting, or they're agitated, upset about something, just waiting and trying like not to do anything that sounds anything like teaching or like providing helpful information. So you can see on here, try not to explain your point of view, reiterate why it's important to brush your teeth or why it's important to do your homework. Don't try to problem solve or teach them a coping skill or offer helpful advice right then. It can be very tempting to point out how they contributed to the situation, right? Like, well, this wouldn't be so stressful if you had remembered to do that earlier, that kind of thing. So just try not to do that. Try to wait on all of those things. While you're waiting, in terms of the power struggle, you can go back to the first strategies. So you could wait, not say those things, and you could be like, you could say something like, I wonder if we can make this a little easier, or why don't I help you, or let's take a break, or whatever it would be. But why wait to teach? So the reason that this is a part of the framework and why I think it's really important in a power struggle, right, is like, first I'll say, I think as adults, we're often drawn to do some type of teaching type talking, which is why I put it in the framework, because I would hear this so often from parents that this was a really common response when engaged with a kid, like, in a struggle or kind of arguing about something. It's like we feel so drawn to be like, let me just explain it to you, or let me help, or let me do this. But when you're already kind of in a power struggle, so I learned that talking agitates the nervous system. And I learned this a while ago now, but I have to like remind myself of it a lot because I like to talk. So it's like disappointing news. But like just knowing like talking agitates the nervous system. And with 2E kids, you can often see this more than you can with other humans. Like with my kid, it's clear that talking agitates him, right? Especially if he's already a little bit upset. So a lot of times talking more just makes your kid more upset and more like emotionally escalated, right? Also, if you're teaching them something or trying to explain them to something or, explain why they need to do this thing, it's just fueling a debate, right? And a struggle where it's sort of like almost like adding to the argument where they're like, I don't want to do it, or they're avoiding in some way. Well, it's important to do it. Um, so it can just create more debate, more upset, more struggle. In a lot of cases, too, I don't really know that teaching is needed. So you could think about this. Even though we're drawn to say these things a lot of times, a lot of power struggles aren't really about that your kid has a lack of information or doesn't understand why they should be doing the task. A lot of times it's just that it's hard or they don't feel up to it or they're feeling stressed or overwhelmed or tired or something. Or that if they're really upset, they're just upset. Like, so a lot of times they know the stuff you're going to teach them anyway, and the struggle or the blow up or whatever it is not really about a lack of knowledge. It's just about being overwhelmed. So you could think about that. Now, sometimes you will have helpful ideas you want to share with your kid, um, or you may want to problem solve together and be like, let's think of a better way to do this. Um, so that could be great, and you may want to come back around to that idea. But even if you have like the most helpful idea for them, kids cannot learn when they're upset. So if you're in a power struggle and they're already upset, they probably can't take the idea in right then anyway. And as adults, we're like this too. Like no one can really learn when they're upset. Like if you're arguing with your partner, right, they may have a really insightful point, but it does not seem insightful or we do not care like in the moment, right? It can be much more effective to wait until the situation has passed and everyone's calm to revisit something that you think would be truly helpful. So you could just, I'll say, you could just wait. And like I said, go back to the other strategies of like, let's add something in that's fun, or like, let's make this easier in some way. So you could just do that. If you want to say more, try validation, right? And like I said, this is a part of my 3-part framework for responding to big feelings. But usually there's some valid reason your kid is resisting a task. And if you're not sure what it is, you could look back at that initial slide or those ideas like, is it too hard for executive functioning? Or you could think, are they just out of energy? Is their battery, are they on like low battery mode, or are they out of power? Is it too much of an affront to their autonomy? Like if your kid really needs autonomy, that's a common reason to resist a task, right? So usually just knowing like, okay, if there's a power struggle going on, something is probably too hard or isn't working for my kid here. So if you are going to say more, you could validate the fact that it's hard or that this task kind of stinks. Validation can be really soothing, right? If you're validating your kid's point of view, it can reduce conflict because you're basically saying like, yeah, good point, or like, I see it, or I understand, you make sense. Right. And if you validate, that can sometimes improve your connection, or your kid can feel like you really like see them or get them or accept them. Um, for 2E kids too, and adults, like validation can be extra nice. Like I think anyone likes to be validated, but 2E folks are frequently misunderstood and invalidated, right? Like they're often told like, um, this should be easy for you, or you're overreacting, or you're doing that the wrong way, or like, no, your perspective is wrong, you're thinking too black and white, right? And all that misunderstanding and invalidation can be really stressful and can actually lead to probably more power struggles. So if you can really like try to get a sense of like, oh, I see where they're coming from, or I see why this is hard, and can share that with them, that could be helpful. Here's just some examples of things you could say that might feel validating. So I have things you can actually say. For some kids, just being quiet and not arguing with them can feel validating, especially if they don't like talking. You might just make a sympathetic sound of some sort, Right, you could be like, ugh, brushing teeth, it's not fun. Like, or like, I know this is like your least favorite thing. You'd rather be doing anything else, or like I know Legos were so much better than this, for older kids, or if you're comfortable with this kind of language, right, to just be like, yeah, applying for jobs sucks. Like ugh, I hate revising a resume. That's ugh, it's so stressful. Um, right, and just kind of validating, like, yeah, I get you. Um, I will say this is different too than like a lot of 2E kids don't like having their like just like naming emotions. Like I think a lot of advice around upset feelings is telling parents like just name your kids' emotions and help them label them. But for a lot of 2E kids, like that can feel yucky or like they're being put on the spot or just it doesn't feel right. A lot of these kids are more cognitive, so they're not sitting there being like, I have to brush my teeth, I'm so sad. They're more like brushing teeth is stupid. Like I hate it. This is uncomfortable, right? And so actually like focusing on the thoughts more can feel more validating. Um, One thing that some parents that I used to do with my kid and some parents have found really helpful is either like blaming the object, right? Like, oh, those sandals are so tricky to buckle, or like socks are uncomfortable. Like, why do they put seams in them? Um, or kind of this like, who designed that? Who decided it should be this way? So like a video game is really hard, right? And it's sort of like, oh, like who made it that way that you can't pause it exactly where you want? Like, that's frustrating. And then you're kind of like a team against this ugh thing. Um, so those are some ways that you could validate. And some kids just, yeah, like don't like any talking. There's something with my kid today that I thought of. I was like, oh, this is kind of like would be relevant for the talk. I don't know what it was, but there was like something where he wasn't saying it was like hard, or I don't know, he was sort of like we could just imagine that where he's sort of like, like, or like, this is hard, like, this is whatever. And I was like, oh, that feels hard to you. And he was like, it doesn't feel hard to me. It is hard. And I feel like I was like, yes, that's like a classic 2E response where it's like, they can really pick up, I think, sometimes on that idea. If you're like, oh, it feels bad to you, or like brushing teeth is no fun for you, they can notice like that subtle, like, well, now you're saying there's something wrong with me, or you're blaming me that I don't like brushing teeth. That's just bad, So just kind of validating that for them. So I like to share some examples because I know a lot of parents will be like, well, I said this, and they'll be like, oh yeah, my kid really doesn't like that. So there can be a different way to think about it. All right, so in terms of applying this, if you want to apply this idea, you could think about, is there something that you usually say or feel pulled to say during a power struggle? And just to think like, does that tend to help in the moment? If you have something that you say that does help, keep doing that, right? Like, great. If you feel like the things you say don't help or kind of like add to the fire, you could think about these questions, right? If you feel really drawn to teach in some way, you could think about like, does my kid need that information? Is this about a skill deficit or a lack of knowledge, or is it just that it's too hard or no fun? Right? If you do want to give them helpful information, could you think of a good time? For a lot of kids, bedtime is a good time where they're more receptive or happy to talk, or like in the car or on a walk where you don't have to look right at each other. You can kind of talk more casually. Um, for a lot of parents, this is one of the hardest skills that we talk about in the coaching group. So you could think about like, okay, like how can I help myself wait and not say those things now? Um, and if you want, you could think about how to validate their perspective. So those are the three big ideas. And then these are things that I probably some of you are wondering about. And so some of these came up in the questions ahead of time, but these questions just kind of always come up too when I talk about these concepts, even in my coaching program. So I wanted to address them in case this is relevant for you or feels helpful. Like I said, I think if you are able to try these strategies or these ideas and you're able to think of a way to apply them in your life that feels like a fit, I would hope that you would see a reduction in stress. But if you're wondering like, well, what if, or if you go and you try to use them and you notice like this negotiation, the amount of negotiation or the amount of saying no or how much my kid avoid, it seems constant, like it's all the time. I can't get them to do anything. Everything is a fight or a battle, or it's not like casual, it's like distressed, intense, intractable. Or if you're noticing like your kid used to be able to do a lot of things and now you're having power struggles over them because they've lost the ability to do it or they've lost skills. Um, or if you notice like the power struggles get really intense, like your kid's emotional reactivity and intensity are really high, or if you try these things and they don't work or you've tried them before, or if you're just not sure like how to use them in your family, these are some things I would consider. If for the first two especially, or I guess for all of them, these would all these considerations could be relevant. So I would consider learning about the PDA profile, which is stands for like persistent or pervasive drive for autonomy. Originally stood for it also stands for pathological demand avoidance. But PDAers have a really strong need for autonomy. And so there can be this feeling from parents of like, this is constant, like I can't get them to do anything. We fight about every little thing. So these ideas would still be relevant, but you kind of have to take them to like a deeper level of like accommodation and changing your expectations for your kid. You could also learn about autistic or ADHD burnout to see if it fits, especially if your kid has lost skills, right? Or if it feels like they can't do things they used to do, or if you feel like your kid is in extreme mental health distress in addition to having power struggles about things. A lot of kids who are being, like I would say, especially teens who are like treated for other mental health concerns or depression or intense anxiety are actually in burnout and they need a different approach. But even little kids, like a lot of like 5 and 6 year olds, like kindergartners and first graders can be in burnout because school is exhausting to them. And parents will see a huge increase in power struggles sometimes at home, or that their kid just can't do things they used to do. Um, if you feel like you are not sure how to make these things work or you don't know how to apply them to your family, I think it can be really helpful to learn more about your kid's neurotype, like from adults, and like Instagram and Facebook and TikTok are actually like great sources of just like helpful lived experience from autistic adults, ADHDers. There's also great books about that kind of thing, where you can learn about kind of um, neurodiversity affirming approaches to parenting. Or you could consider getting more support, right, from, I would recommend a neurodivergent therapist or coach who could help you or your child, or maybe both. So, like, if you're feeling a lot of this distress and intensity around these things. So, the last things I just wanted to share some additional resources. So, if like this talk is based on my free 5-day email mini course. So, there's a lot of overlap in the content, but there's more in the course, although it's presented in a different way. But if you liked this idea and you would like more ideas like this, or you want a written version, or you want some more details, you may be interested in the 5-day email mini course. There's the QR code for that. And I think the Real Team is going to share the link where you can sign up for that if you want as well. If you do want more parenting support, or if you like these ideas, but you want help figuring out how to apply them to your family, I do have an 8-week group coaching program, right? That's really like, it covers these big ideas and principles and then other basic, like other guiding principles and strategies that are designed to help you with really any tricky parenting situation, right? Everything from power struggles and chores to sibling relationships or school stressors or things like that. And you get a lot of just personal help from me. So you get a lot of like, there's often a lot of kind of figuring things out where it's like, here's the big ideas. Why don't you go, how could you adapt them to your kid? Try them, see what works, see what doesn't. We talk about it so that you start to feel more confident actually applying these things. So there's a QR code for that if you want to learn more about it. And then I recently learned about this way to get feedback on talks. Like I do give talks to parents like this, and I would love to know like what's helpful or what's not. So either if you're here live or on the recording, this should still work. So this is a way to give feedback on the talk. And also if you complete this, you'll get a copy of the slides so that you have access to those and you can kind of download and keep a copy of the slides from today. So my understanding of how this works, I haven't used it before, but that you can scan the QR code, or you can go to this link and then enter the code POWER, like for power struggles when you're prompted. And there should just be some questions to get your feedback on the talk. And then when you're done, you should be able to just download the slides. If you have any trouble accessing the slides for some reason, you're welcome to email me and I can give them to you, and I can put my email in the chat. So I think that's it. So I'll leave this here for a minute, but then it's time for questions.
Thank you so much, Danika. That was amazing and touched on so many things that we personally go through on a daily basis. So I really appreciate it. Very practical.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
We got a lot of questions. So here's the first one. I want to be flexible, but my kid, ASD anxiety, is very rigid. If we bend the rules or change the routine once, i.e. today you can go to bed 10 minutes later, or today you don't have to practice piano as long, that becomes the new rule, and he gets very upset if it changes again in the future. How do we handle this? Is being flexible making things worse? Unrelated, every single thing must be negotiated every day forever after once he sees it can be flexible.
Okay, that's helpful. So like I'll say again, just a disclaimer, like I can share some ideas often for questions like this, like in coaching, we might go back and forth. Like I would probably gather lots of data and, it would help me with ideas. But in these questions, I like to just share some basic ideas. I hope they're helpful. So one thing that can work for some families in that case, when their kid can get really stuck on like, wait, we did it this way, and now that means I can negotiate all the time, or now it means this, is if you know that about your kid, but if you think flexibility would be helpful, either for your kid or for you, would be sometimes like pre-structuring the flexibility and pre-setting expectations. And I do this a lot with my kid actually, because this would happen with him too, where it would be like, okay, so here's the deal. Like you get to, we have a rule where my kid gets to add one thing to dinner, and that developed, there's a whole long reason that developed, right? But like he used to want to add all kinds of things ever since he could like indicate things basically as a baby, right? And eventually we were like, you can add something, because that really helps him to have that autonomy to add something, but you can add one thing. But then there would be days where it's like, oh, you're really struggling. Like you added your one thing, but you're like, now you're about to have a total meltdown that you can't add a second thing. And I know you're really tired because you had a long day or you're sick or something. And so the way I would frame it with my kid would be like, look, the rule is you can add one thing to dinner. And today's kind of a different day, like I can see you're really tired. You really want that one thing. I understand why. We could add that, you could add a second thing today, but just a second thing, that's it. I think that's enough, right? And then we'll go back to the regular rule tomorrow. And kind of like, okay, like, what do you think of that plan? So for some kids, that's enough structuring where you're kind of like preemptively letting them know, like, here's what to expect. Right? Because a lot of like what's rigidity comes from like a need to know what to expect, and for the unexpected to be stress, right? Anxiety provoking, confusing, ambiguous. So sometimes by like reducing that and structuring it, you can reduce that. Some families, I hear a lot from families where it's like, well, but if they get to negotiate once, then they'll negotiate more. That would be something where I'd want to kind of like think together and learn more, where it might be like, well, if your kid is negotiating all the time, or if they then always want that to be the new rule, would that actually be a more appropriate standard for them, aligned with their capacity? Like if they're going to always ask for that, should that be the new rule, or what do you think? Would that work for your family? Right? Or are there places where you would want to limit your flexibility because you can't be flexible about it all the time? And just thinking about that. And the idea too that like you can be flexible in some places and not in others, right? Like as a parent, you don't have to be like flexible about everything. And a lot of the parents I work with find that just having like a little flexibility about certain things can lead to reduction in power struggles, or they'll see if they're flexible, their kid gets more flexible. Usually not about the same thing, usually about something totally different. So I encourage parents too to think about like, what's the low hanging fruit that would like be easy for me to give some flexibility, or, add an interest or make it easier for my kid. And you could start there. So you might start with something easier than something that feels hardest for the family.
Thank you. Those are great suggestions. What if
Here, I'll stop sharing this too, so I can see folks now. There's been enough time. Okay.
Here, I can. make you big.
Thanks.
What if the goal is time sensitive and there is no time to be flexible or introduce interesting things for him to do while achieving the goal? My problem is my child takes forever to do everything, and oftentimes he's doing something interesting to him that is distracting him from doing what he should be doing.
Mm-hmm. In that case, sometimes the solution is not, or like the thing that's most helpful is not to be more flexible or introduce more interests, but to actually give more support and make it easier. So give support for what's hard. So that's actually came up as a theme in my coaching program recently, where it's like, parents had a similar question of kind of like, well, but if I'm flexible about that, like we have to get out the door in the morning and it just leads us to be later. And so, and like a lot of like, especially if you're thinking about flexibility around like a task that a kid like does not want to do, like get dressed for school in the morning, for example. In that case, I would suggest to focus more on making the task easier. So could you, like, what's getting in the way of your kid starting it? It's really hard to leave the thing they love to go to the thing that's hard. So you could come in and be like, hey, like, I'll help you get started getting dressed. Or some parents I work with, like, and I do this. I mean, my kid's still, he's 5, so he's young, but like I dress him every morning. Like if I waited for him to dress himself, we would just never go to school. Like, so it's sort of like, okay, I'm going to help you. And we have our little routine, right? Where it's like, you can watch your videos, I can get you dressed, and we can get out the door. So not that every parent has to do that, but that oftentimes what would be needed there would be like more hands-on support, more structure. So maybe flexibility wouldn't be the most helpful strategy then.
Yeah, I've also heard of parents who put their kids in the clothes for the next day at night instead of pajamas.
Totally. Yes, they can sleep in their clothes for kids who really hate that transition in the morning. Absolutely. And just that's a great example of like, there's no one right way to get dressed. Like, there's lots of ways to get dressed. The goal is
Okay.
to be covered when you leave the house.
Um, okay. What about the kid who finds everything boring and won't participate in anything at school or at home that is outside of his special interest, cannot be motivated or encouraged even with the validation?
Mm-hmm. Hmm. That would make me curious, I think, about mm, I don't know. I guess that would just make me curious about like what needs might not be met for that kid. I mean, to be fair, like I used to be a teacher, right? And I don't know this kid's school situation, but some schools really like, yeah, I've had students where it's like, yeah, I can see why you don't want to do any of these things. Like these are not relevant, interesting, meaningful. They're not at your level. You don't feel comfortable, right? It's stressful in these ways. Um, so I guess what I would be curious about would be like, what are some of the other things that they're hoping that kid will be engaged in? And like, is that a reasonable expectation, or is there a reason the kid is not interested in those? Are there other barriers in the way? Or it would make me, or I guess, and it would make me wonder about just like overall level of stress. Because some kids who, like can't engage in anything or who fight about everything or push back on anything are just like constantly stressed. So like the reason they can only engage in their interests is because everything else feels too threatening or they feel too overwhelmed. So I would be curious about potential burnout, right? Or things that may have been slightly stressful for them over time or that haven't felt like a good fit. And sometimes it's tricky because with a lot of gifted like 2E kids, those things could be really subtle. Like, so it could be that, like, I've worked with families where it's like you could be a very supportive, very attentive parent, right? And be trying to attune to your kid, and you may not know, and your kid may not know to tell you how stressful lots of sensory things are, for example, or how confused and overwhelmed they feel at school, or you've just always thought they were anxious or, like more introverted, but they're actually pretty overwhelmed all the time. And a lot of neurodivergent kids would never think to tell their parents that, right? And they may not be communicating it clearly. So sometimes more digging is required too to get a sense of like, what's going on? Is something stressing you out? So
Yeah, we have valid, more confirmation of this in the
yeah,
chat. And
Kelly,
personally, that resonates with us when my child was going through severe school trauma.
yeah,
We, loss of skills, push back on everything. Everything was a meltdown. And
yeah.
once we fixed that situation, things got a lot better.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, okay, so we have some teen questions, especially how to handle, video game screen addiction. A lot
Mm,
of pre-submitted questions too were about screens. That is a
sure.
huge power struggle for many people.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so with 2E kids, it's interesting. And again, like the individual answer to this would be complex, right? But big picture, like a lot of neurodivergent folks use screens to regulate. And so, like a lot of times in my parent coaching program, parents come in very worried about screens, worrying that their kids can't transition off of them, are too interested in them, right? There's lots of power struggles about them. But as we talk about the potential benefits of screens for their kid, and the way that a lot of kids, like especially PDAers, but I would say like autistic and ADHD kids too, and probably gifted kids in general, right, can get a lot out of it. I guess PDAers tend to use screens for regulation because PDAers kind of go through the world where like the world just feels stressful and overwhelming. So they kind of are needing some kind of regulation all the time. So if they can't be engaged in a special interest and they can't be having like pleasant one-on-one, regulating interactions with a preferred adult, the screen provides that regulation. So sometimes what looks like addiction to screens in a negative way is actually using screens as coping in a healthy way. And a lot of parents, like, and this is very individual, like, so this is not like that you need to go do this, but just to open up this possibility, I think our society tells us a lot, like screens are bad. You need to limit screen time, and a lot of parents, I think, feel like ashamed if their kid spends a lot of time on screens, or they'll like apologize or feel guilty for like, oh, I let them have screens. So I want to just open up the possibility and knowing that like within the neurodiversity paradigm, a lot of neurodivergent people actually really benefit from time on screens. And some families find that like removing screen time limits actually like especially if your kid is in burnout or overwhelmed or right they don't really have the capacity to do other things, that can be really beneficial for the kid to actually kind of like rest and heal over time. And that the kids, especially if a kid's been in burnout, once they recover they naturally are like, I want to go do other things. And we saw that with my kid who we had to remove from school almost like a year ago, like in May, because it was such a bad fit. And he was also kind of in little tiny 4-year-old person burnout. And he used screens a lot, and we removed most of the limits or a lot of the limits around them. And just recently, well, he returned to school in August, but recently he's just like, I don't, let's do something else. I want to do these other things. And it's really cool to see some natural progression with that. So not that every kid would do that, but that could be a possibility too. So even if you're like worried your kid is addicted, I would really be thinking about like what need is the screen meeting that's maybe not being met in a different way, right? And is that if you really want another way to meet that need, can you think of another way to meet it, right? Or can you work with them? Um, so yeah, just something to think about.
There's a follow-up. One of my fears with both of my boys is that it feels like they don't know what else to do but screens.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and some of that might be like it could be that, so thinking about like if you think your kid does have the capacity for other things, knowing that like screens are truly hard to transition off of too, right? They're designed to like keep our attention. A lot of adults have a hard time getting off their screen, right? Um, so I think like you can see that sometimes. And for my kid, we definitely went through a time where it was like, ooh, you need something other than screens, but it's hard, it's hard for him to independently transition off of that. So we like reintroduced some limits because it was like, you're getting cranky. Or, Deepa, you said like, you can see like, this seems to be causing you to be more upset or like, and some kids will know, like people will notice like, oh, my kid is just off when they're on the screen for too long, right? And then it's not meeting the need in the same way. So then it would be thinking about how to potentially offer other ideas that would be interesting related to the kid's interests in a way that still offers them autonomy. Because you can end up in a power struggle with your kid about trying to do something other than screens. So you could use some of the same ideas to support that transition. Um, like like my kid is little, but one thing I ended up using is like activities we suggested, he would say no. But so we ended up being like, okay, well, you don't have to leave the house or do anything, but we are going to take like, we started with like, we're going to take a 1 hour break from screens and just starting little, right? Instead of being like, you can only do it 30 minutes a day. It was like on the weekend, we have to do at least 1 hour break, right? Or 2 30-minute breaks or whatever. And then he was able to find things he wanted to do with us, right? We had some times of like, I just want to go back to my screen. And I'd have to remind myself of like, this is fine. This is just him with his brain figuring out like, what the heck do I do when I'm not doing that? And it might take some processing time. Another thing that worked for my kid was like writing options on post-it notes, because that was less like threatening to his autonomy, or be like, here's some things we could go do today, right? And he'd be like, oh, Dairy Queen, okay. Like, so they're just different ways to kind of get creative about giving your kids information to help them with some of that thing as well. But yeah, these are the types of questions too that it's like, I'm like, oh, I want to ask all the questions and learn about your kid. And because that stuff could really be personalized. So
Yeah, if you want more details and more back and forth with Danica, definitely sign up
reach
for
out. Yes,
coaching.
exactly. Exactly.
Okay, so here's an interesting one. How do we help our children address power struggles they have with themselves? For instance, understanding that we all have power capacity and it's okay if our capacity is lower on a given day or lower than someone else's, or wanting to do a writing assignment and resisting doing the writing assignment all at the same time, just within herself.
I was actually thinking about this recently. I can share how I was thinking about it. And I think a lot of kids, like I would be curious about PDA for a kid like that too, like maybe a more internalized like presentation. Like recently, as I've been learning about internalized PDA, I'm like, oh, I think I'm a PDAer, but I always present it as like very well behaved, very fawning, very people pleasing, very rule following. But I found my own internal ways to like do things my own way or find autonomy or like, bend the rules to my way. And I think a lot of internalized PDAers have these internal battles where they'll like kind of control themselves as a way, or they may find like, I really want to do this, but I can't do this, or I won't let myself, or I can't do it perfectly, or, that kind of thing. But the other idea I was having about power struggles, because I was thinking about this talk and I was thinking, a lot of neurodivergent adults, I'm like, what happens to the power struggle when you become an adult, right? Like your kids are going to grow up, like many of them will become independent, living on their own. And then it's like, what happens to that power struggle? And I was like, I think it really gets internalized, like in that a lot of neurodivergent adults, we have power struggles in our mind where we are telling ourselves like, you need to be brushing your teeth, like you need to be doing a better job, I don't want to, or like you need to be working on that essay, not now, whatever it is. And I was thinking like in some ways it's us like struggling against the neuronormative expectations that we have inherited from society that say like you should be able to do all these things and you should be able to do them easily, right, and they shouldn't be hard for you, and us being like, it is hard for me, it can't be hard for you, you're a grown-up, this kind of like struggle. And that a lot of times families find themselves in that power struggle where the parents are kind of the stand-in, like as the parents we hold a lot of that anxiety and pressure from society, and we can bring it to our interactions with our kids where we're afraid for them, kind of like, you have to be able to do these things, society says this, and the kid's like, no, I don't, that doesn't work for me. Right. And that's why I think the neurodiversity paradigm, it can be helpful, because it can help us see like, hey, society's expectations are unreasonable and they're not for us, really, they're not a great fit, right? Our brains work differently, we need something different. And then you can be like a team fighting against neuronormative society instead of like fighting against each other. So for that kid, and for any kid, I think, who's struggling with like an internal power struggle or feeling stuck on things or thinking like, I should be able to do this, I think understanding their brain and how their brain works in a way that's not shaming, that's like, all brains are different, here's what's cool about your brain, here's how your brain works best, can help reduce that over time. It's like not a quick fix, but I think it can give them a more compassionate framework than society is going to give them. That makes sense. So,
I really love that. I love being a team together against society.
yeah.
So I think we are at the end. There are so many more questions. Well, okay, I'll do one more teenager one and then we'll wrap
Sure.
up. My teenager doesn't have hobbies or pursued interests. She says she wants to learn to drive, but doesn't pursue it, or yoga, etc.
Mhm.
She's like, I'm not sure if this is about overwhelm or getting started, or I think we had some other pre-submitted questions too about motivation.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think again, these are ones that it's like it's hard to answer without knowing more information. But one idea that I haven't talked about that might be helpful is declarative language. And I didn't put this link for the real team, but there's like a declarative language handbook. If you Google it, you can find
Sure,
it.
what we can do.
By Linda K. Murphy, and she's been interviewed on podcasts like the Neurodiversity podcast and stuff too. And declarative language is just this idea of like trying to use declarative language versus imperative language. So imperative language like tells the kid to do something, right? It's sort of like telling the kid what to do or asking them questions and kind of expecting a response. Whereas declarative language is more just like offering information or observations about the situation, the possibilities, or your own internal thing. And I like Linda K. Murphy says, with declarative language, you focus on giving instead of getting. So you focus on giving your kid all the information they need to kind of make their own decision about what they want to do, versus focusing on trying to get them to do something. So if there's a concern like, oh, my kid, like she wants to learn to drive, but she doesn't pursue it or yoga or whatever, right? And you're even kind of wondering, Lori, is it overwhelm? Is it getting started? You have some ideas of what it could be. You could say something like, I've heard you say you want to learn to drive. And I can also see that like it's hard to get started, right? Or like, and I'm wondering if there's any way that I could be helpful to you about that, or like I'm available if you want that, right? Or be like, oh, you want to learn to drive. There's so many parts to that. It can feel overwhelming. There's lots of different steps, and like I'm happy to give you more information if you want. Or, this kind of like offering, or even sometimes if you want to brainstorm with your kid, like your kid might know like what it's about, or maybe able to share some insights into like, here's why I'm not like I do want to drive and here's why I'm not. But if you say like, hey, I know you want to learn to drive, but you haven't, what's going on? It may be like, leave me alone, right? But if you're like, hey, I saw you said you want to learn to drive, but I know that you haven't started, and like I'm just really curious about like what's going on and if there's any way I could help. It's like an invitation, and then your kid might be able to say like, oh, it's this thing or it's that thing, and you might be able to work together. So sometimes declarative language can be helpful. I think of it as just like dropping little descriptions. Like you don't even have to have the conversation then. You could just be like, I've been thinking about how you said you wanted to learn to drive. You might just say that like over breakfast, right? And just leave it and then let your teen maybe come back to you. Um, and just giving plenty of processing time for those types of things that can sometimes make it easier for our kids to talk to us, I think.
Kelly's saying, I've been wondering about, this reminds me a lot of when the kids were little and we were told to just leave things around the house.
Yeah, yeah,
Leave toys
exactly.
out, just leave toys out and see what they,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And that concept is called like strewing in the homeschool and like the unschooling. And yeah, a lot of folks find that with their PDAers, that's really helpful. Yeah. Right. Where it's like, oh, here's this thing. Like,
This driving pamphlet.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Right. Or you could be like, oh man, I remember when I learned to drive, and they'd be like, oh, like, or like I could tell you stories if you want to hear. Kids love to hear the things we've messed up or that were hard for us. So you could start with that to normalize it too. So yeah.
Love it. Danica, thank you so much. This
Yeah,
had so many amazing practical tips. I really feel like I have tools to try tomorrow. So
I'm so glad.
really
I'm glad to
appreciate
hear that.
it.
It's my pleasure. I was really excited to talk about it with you all.
Thank you. And I put all the links in the chat so you can get a hold of Danica and join her coaching group and get her slides. And we hope to see you at a future real event. There's a neurodiversity speaker series tomorrow night. And so I'll say good night to everyone. Thank you again so much.
Thanks, Nayo.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks.